Welcome to Server-Side Web Development. This is Lecture 3. Today, we are going to be covering dynamic pages and how we build those. We'll also talk about form handling, how PHP can handle forms that are submitted to a page. We'll also be talking about sessions and what they are and how we use them in pages and with PHP, and we'll be talking about include. So we're going to be covering quite a bit in this lecture. It sounds like it will move quickly. So there's going to be a lot of information here. We have two assignments for this week. We have a participation assignment, amazing adventure, and an exercise, functional fishing. So before we get started, though, just a few announcements I do want to bring up. The first one is that I've added some hints to the domino assignment. If you have not seen those yet, they are on the domino assignment page. Towards the bottom, there's a hint section where I provide some hints on how to complete that assignment. Along with that, these are a couple of announcements I've also made in Brightspace, but I want to mention them in case you missed them. The first one is for those students who are using Laragon. It has come to my attention that the PHP version, or the version of PHP that comes with Laragon, is not going to be adequate for the final project. And this is only for the final project. It will work fine for anything up until then. So you will need to update your PHP before we start working on the final project. I've added some instructions on how to do that. Please look at the Brightspace announcement for the link to those instructions. And the last announcement I have, I've also made this to Brightspace, is I created a little project directory. And what this is a single file, index.php file, which you'll place inside of your MTM6405 folder. And all it does is it will display all the folders that are inside of that one, and essentially your projects. And then you can click on it and it'll take you to that project. I know some students were struggling on getting their projects to load, and this is just kind of a quick way to help you out with that. It's not mandatory, you do not need to use it, but it should be helpful for you. All right, are there any questions before we get started? All right. So if there are no questions, we'll go ahead and jump right into it with dynamic pages. So when I talk about dynamic pages, I'm referring to a page that can change its content dynamically based on what is being passed through the URL. So you all worked with WordPress. One of the default features of WordPress is that you can pass the ID of the post you want through the URL, and that will display the post inside of the page. And the way that works is there's a single template page that loads for all posts, and then WordPress will look for that ID in the URL, find the content in the database and display it on the page. Well, we're going to build something very similar like that today, much simpler than it, obviously, but we're going to build something using that same concept. And that's what we're referring to as dynamic pages. Okay, so, but before we actually talk about how we build the dynamic pages, we do need to discuss a few other things. And the first one is multi-dimensional arrays. Now, you've all gone through Introduction to JavaScript, and we did use multi-dimensional arrays in there slightly, but I want to also show you how they work in PHP. So a multi-dimensional array is an array that contains other arrays. Now, with each nested array, we'll need to have an extra level of notation to access those inner arrays. And multidimensional arrays are very, very common in PHP because oftentimes we will be retrieving data from some sort of source that's going to be in kind of a table format where we have each row will be an array of itself, and then each item in that array is a column within that table. And this is working with databases or even with other data as well. So my multi-dimensional arrays are very, very common inside of PHP, and we need to get used to them. So let's see an example of how a typical multi-dimensional array would look. So here we have a multi-dimensional array contacts, and it has two contacts in it. We have the first contact and we have a second contact. Now, if you're used to with JavaScript, we might have an array of objects, for example. That's kind of the same concept we're doing here, except for, again, JavaScript, or excuse me, PHP doesn't have objects. It has just associative arrays. So here we have an array with inside of it are associative arrays. Each associative array has a set of properties inside of it, or key value pairs that match. So we have a name, email, name, email. You could think of this as being data we've retrieved from, say, a database, where we're getting contacts with their name and email. Now, with each array inside of here, we need to access, if we want to access this name, we need to add the extra notation. So if we want to just access this first array, we would use the standard notation. We'd grab our variable contact, or contacts, and then we do a set of square brackets, and then we could do 0. That will give us the first contact, but that gives us the entire array. If we wanted just the name of the first contact, we'd add another set of square brackets, and we would do name, like so. So just remember, each time we have a nested array, we need another set of notation or square brackets to access each one. Now, typically, we won't go more than 2 or 3 deep. If you go more deep than that, it gets really, really hard to keep things straight on where things are at. But generally, it's usually 1 or 2 deep, no more than that. All right, so that is essentially multi-dimensional arrays. We have worked with them in JavaScript. Now we just need to work with them in PHP. All right, so the next thing we need to talk about when related to our dynamic pages is the get variable. Now, this is the first predefined variable we're going to be discussing. We're going to be covering other ones as well. But the get variable is an associative array of variables passed to the query string or passed through the URL. So if you've ever looked at some URLs, say on Amazon or whatever, you might notice that they'll have up in the URL after some code or after a page or whatever, they have this question mark, and then they might have something like name, and then it will just be equals, and then some other stuff. That is everything after that question mark is the query string. That's what we refer to as the query string. And what they are key value pairs that get passed through the URL. Now we can use, PHP can grab that query string and grab those variables, and it does this automatically actually. It grabs those variables and it stores it inside of a variable called $_get. And it's an array. And each name or each property key value pair, each key is stored as the associative array key, and the value is stored as the value. So we can access each one of those key value pairs from the get array. All right, so again, these variables can be stored from, they can get passed using the get method. So there are different methods of requesting information from the browser. The two most common are get and post, and we'll cover both of those today. So when we're talking about passing data through the URL, that's using a get method. So again, one of the advantages of using the get array is it allows us to load different data for the same template, because we're going to be passing something in the query string that's essentially saying, okay, now this is a different page, so load some different data. So we're going to see an example of what that looks like. So here, for example, we have, say we have a page index.php, and we call it in the browser index.php question mark name equals Michael. Well, if we were, because this is the query string being passed to index.php, PHP has automatically grabbed that name and value and stored it into the $_ variable. So if we wanted to retrieve the name Michael, we can do $_ set of square brackets because it's an array, and then the key name. And that would return Michael. And that's essentially it. If this was a different name, say if this was, say, John, then John would be returned here. Now, you can add additional things to a query string by using the ampersand, like that. And then you just do another key value pair. So let's say title equals prof. Okay. And then we would be able to access that one from the get as well. All right. So that's it for the slides. We're going to actually do a demo for this, the blog demo for it. If you look on the course website, so I'm jumping back here to the course website, MTM6405 on MDAC, and we go to week 3, we'll see under the additional resources, we have quite a bit for this week under additional resources. We have these repositories. We have blog and blog complete. This is what we're going to be looking at right now, are these two repositories. If you want to follow along, you really don't have to, but if you want to follow along, you can go ahead and download or clone this blog repository. But honestly, I just recommend that you grab the completed version, and then you can kind of just watch what I'm doing, and you can look at how the completed version looks. All right, but that's what I'm going to walk through today or right now, because a lot of this stuff really requires you to see how this works. All right, so I'm going to jump back over here. So here is my information for my blog. So I've already cloned the repository down. I have my starter files over here. I have my page loaded. Now this is that project directory I was talking about. So right now what I have loaded here is MTM6405.test. And because I have that directory index.php file, it's showing me my different projects that are in that folder. And I can jump to them by just clicking on any one of these links, and it will take me to that page. So for example, I want to go to the blog, so I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it'll load the blog up for me. Okay, so there is the index.php. This is the main page that we're going to be looking at. And right at the top, you'll see that there is an associative, a multi-dimensional associative array being stored inside of the index.php page. It's got a post, and what it does is it's basically storing the values for all the posts. Basically, it's just storing a title and then a set of links, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But this is kind of how this would work if we were even working with a database. We would store this information in the database under a record, and then we would retrieve it as a multi-dimensional associative array. All right, so that's posts. We're going to be using that to essentially display different pages of our post here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and collapse this down. We'll look at that in more detail here in a moment. But the first thing I want to do is I want to set up my post so that I can read when a post is been launched, meaning that I want to be able to hit call a specific post and then pass the ID of that post through the URL and it being displayed on my page. So how do I do that? Well, the first thing I need to do is to set up my page here so that it will display a post that it's post content. Okay, so I'm going to do this by just creating a new variable. Remember that in PHP, variables start with a $sign. So I'm just going to call this one current as being the current post. And I'm going to just set it to the first post. I'm going to do post, and I'm going to do post-1. All right, so this is current is just going to hold the data of post 1. Right, so it's going to store this array inside of it. And I'm going to use that to display content in my page. So I'm going to just scroll down here and I'm going to update the title. I'm just going to worry about the title for right now. So I'm going to change post, which is this title right here. And I'm going to change it to the title of the current, which I've set for my post. So let's do that. Now, I'm going to replace post here with a PHP block. So I'm going to open up a PHP block. So that's, again, less than question mark PHP. I'm going to close it up. So we do that with a question mark greater than. Make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so there is my PHP block. And now I want to echo out the title of the current post. So I'm going to do echo title. Oh, excuse me, not title. Sorry, current. And then title, like so. All right, so we're getting current here. That's the array. We get the title. That's the property. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, refresh my page, and we can see that it now says my first post. That is the title of the first post. That's showing up. Okay, so all this is doing is something that we covered pretty much in week 1. No big deal. All right, so now I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm setting things up a little differently than I normally would, but I'm going to come down here. I'm going to work on these links now. So the way these links work, I'm going to scroll down here. We have this previous and next link. And essentially what these are supposed to do is they allow you to go to the next or previous post in the list. And those have been identified inside of our post array by under this links array that's inside of each post. And the links tell you what kind of link it is. Is it a next link or is it a previous link? And then which post to go to. Okay, so this is going to be the next link. For the first one, it's going to have a next link, no previous link, and it's going to go to the post number 2. So we're going to set up the links here to do that as well. So this is going to require a for loop because we're going to actually create a loop and we're going to loop over all of the different, or no, excuse me, not a loop. We're not going to use a loop. We're just going to use standard if statements here. So we're going to use an if statement here. And we're going to check to see if the current post has, if the current post links array has a previous element inside of it. Okay, it sounds a little complicated. It's going to be. This is where I'm dealing with multi-dimensional arrays can get a little confusing. So let me write this out. So we're going to do if. Now we're going to use a function. This is going to be very, very important. I cannot stress how much we're going to use this function. There is a function called isSet. And what isSet does is it allows us to check to see if a variable has been set, has been given a value. And this is so important in PHP that we use this all the time. So you really should remember this. Write it down or whatever you need to do to remember this one. But isSet is incredibly important. And it is a function, so it takes a parentheses. And what we pass inside of it is whatever variable or property inside of an array or element inside of an array that we're looking for. So in this case, we are looking for something inside of an array. And what we're looking for is the current array. And we're looking for the links array and the previous element inside of that. So current, let me scroll back up to my arrays. So we're looking for the current arrays, which is the post 1. Then we're looking for the links inside of there, which is also an array. Then we're looking to see, does it have a previous? Well, this one doesn't. So that would come back as essentially false because it is not set. All right, and now I'm going to use a colon to close this up. And I'm going to wrap this around my previous. I'm going to do an end if. All right, so because I used a colon here, I do need to use the end if right here. If you use a open curly brace here, you can just use a closing curly brace here and not worry about the end if. It's purely a preference on which one you use. Okay, so this will only display this previous if there is a prev property inside of the links array inside of the current post. Hopefully everyone followed that. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh my page. And we do see that that previous has disappeared because there is no prev inside of post 1. Okay, so we're going to set up previous, the next one, the same way. So I'm just going to copy this code here. I'll paste that in. Whoops, I want to do this. Okay, so, and we want to switch this to next. So we have here is our previous. Again, we're checking to see if that's previous, to output the previous. And now we're checking to see if there's a next, and this will output the next. We'll save it, we'll refresh, and we still have the next button, which we should, because there is a next link here. Now, this doesn't do anything, because if I were to click on this button, it doesn't do anything, because we have not set up any hrefs for these links. So that's what we're going to do next. Now that we have verified whether or not there is a previous or a next link, if there is, we need to set up our anchor tag to then redirect to whatever post it should go to. So we're going to do this using just a standard href inside of HTML. And inside of here is where we're going to add some PHP. So the first thing is we're going to add that question mark. Remember, the question mark allows us to add a query string. That's the first indication that there is a query string. So we're going to do question mark, and after the question mark, we are going to add post. And then we'll go do an equal sign. And after our equal sign will be the post name or the post slug that comes from our link here. So we're going to do, again, another PHP block, echo current links, and then we'll do a prev, essentially what we just looked for. And then we'll add our semicolon and close up. Okay, so notice that I'm just slapping PHP all over inside of my HTML. This is perfectly acceptable. In fact, this is best practice. This is how we do it. We'll just insert PHP wherever we feel like inside of our HTML. And they get intertwined, get kind of messy. But it actually makes it a lot easier to work with this way as opposed to the old way where we were just outputting all of our HTML inside of PHP. It was a big mess. So again, I'm just inserting this PHP. This will output the post name and place it inside of this href. So I'm going to do the same thing for our next button. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'll go down below, and I'm going to switch prev to next. So now I've set this up so that depending on what post we go to, it will then display it will link to our previous and next. All right, so let's see this in action. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to refresh. And if you were very quick in eye, you might have noticed that this link changed a little bit. And that's because it is now an actual link. It has an href associated with it. And I'm hovering over it. And it might be a little hard to see on your screen. But it now points to the question mark post equals post-2. Okay, so it's sending it to the second post. If I were to click next, though, it's not going to do anything. We got a refresh in there, but we're still seeing my first post. And that's because while we've set up these links to add that query string, we're not doing anything in our PHP code to use that query string to change our content, because all we have done is set current to post 1. So no matter what we type in the URL, as long as we're in index.php, it's just going to be post 1. So let's go ahead and fix this code up here so that we are retrieving that query string. All right, so here we go. We're going to do another if statement here. And because the first thing we need to check for is we need to check that there is a query string, because we don't know that. We won't be able to tell that. But the way we tell if there's a query string, and specifically a query string that contains the variable post, is we use is set, just like we did before. So we're going to do if is set get, and then we're going to do post, like that. All right, so remember, is set is just checking to see if a variable has a value. Then we have this get variable, which again is what PHP uses to store all of the query strings that are currently being passed to the browser. And because we are looking specifically for the post query, the post value inside of the query string, we're putting post in here. All right, so like that. Now, I'm just going to do an echo here, and I'm just going to echo out the query string post. Okay, so if there is a post, I'm just going to echo out its value. That's all this is going to do. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh. And looks like I've got some stuff covering it up. All right, so that didn't work out so well for me because I can't see. Unfortunately, due to the Zoom thing, it's blocking my view. But let's go ahead and we're going to move forward on that. So let's assume that it worked and it did what it was supposed to do. What we want to do from there then, if assuming that we do have this post, what I want to do is then set current to that post. So I'm going to set current to whatever post is being passed to get post. So I'm going to do post, and we'll do $_get, and we'll do post. Like that. So notice that we got a lot of square brackets going on here. So post is an array, and to get an index of that array, we would use a set of square brackets like this. Say we could do post 1. Right? But we don't want to do post 1. We want to do the value of get underscore post. So we're going to just place that right here. And that's what I've done. All right? So now current will then be whatever post is being passed through the URL. Now, if no post is being passed through the URL, we're going to add an else statement here, and then we're going to just set it to post 1, like so. All right, now I'll save that, I'll refresh, and now you can see, remember I had pushed the next button, so I was actually displaying post number 2, and you can see that it now does show the title for post number 2. If we scroll down, we have our previous and next button. So I can click previous, and this will take me back to the first post. I can hit next. This takes me to number 2. If I hit next again, it takes me to another post. This is post number 3. Okay, we can verify that with the title. So here's post 3, another post. If I hit next one more time, this gives me to my last post. And again, no next button because there is no next link for post 4. All right, so that in a very, very short nutshell is kind of how we can use the get array that's being predefined by PHP to retrieve query string, variables passed through the query string, and then use that to dynamically create pages. Again, we're working with just a single page here, but it is displaying different content based off of the query string being passed. Right? Are there any questions about dynamic pages? Okay. So I'm going to take the silence as that everybody understands and not that people can't hear me.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
Could you talk about the current variable, that part? I missed that part.
Okay, so with the current variable, what we're doing here is we're creating a variable that will be dependent on, it's going to hold whatever post we want to display on the page. So it is either going to be the post that is being passed through the URL, the post ID that's being passed through the URL using get underscore post. So that will be either post one, post dash two, post dash three, or post dash four, one of those. And that's what current is going to be. Current will be then set to that post array. Remember, each one of these is an array. So current is currently equal, because I'm on the last post, is currently equal to this right here, this array. But if there is no post being passed through the URL, no post variable being passed through the URL, then we're just going to set current to post one. Okay, so we're just setting it to post one as kind of a fallback. Does that make sense?
Okay, kind of.
So this same concept, oh, go ahead. Yes.
Uh, in this case, should not be the post 3, because if the post 4 is the last one, post 3.
Yeah, we are on the last post. So unfortunately, I can't see with the way this. Let me do this. Okay, so here you can see inside of my URL now. Right here is the query string, and you can see that it says question mark post equals post dash 4. Okay, if I hit previous, it now says post dash 3, and we are looking at the third post. Does everyone see how that works? This is the query string. This is what we're referring to. This is what we get. This is what gets passed to the $_get array.
Okay.
So the current the variable named current, we couldn't name it with other names. It's a fixed one.
Yeah, I mean, you can call this whatever you want. This is just a variable. The reason you could call it post, if that makes more sense. The reason why I didn't is there's more to this, which I'm not going to cover in this lecture or right now. That we're going to be using the post variable somewhere else. Essentially, why I'm using current here.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thanks.
All right. So if you want a more in-depth view on how get works, the Amazing Adventure assignment works exactly like this. This is what it's all about, is using the get variable and multi-associative arrays, multi-dimensional associative arrays. And there is a solution video for that assignment, which you can watch and kind of walk through how to do this as well. All right, so any further questions before we move on to our next topic? Okay, so the next topic we want to talk about is form handling. So previously we were working with dynamic pages where we're talking about passing data through the URL and manipulating the page based off of that. Well, the way form handling works is when a user submits a form, where does that data go and how can we manage that data using PHP? So the first thing we need to talk about with that is the $_post predefined variable. And just like the $_get, this is an associative array that will hold variables that are passed using the post method as opposed to the get method. Now, when we talk about post, typically this is done through forms. So when you submit a form can actually be submitted through get, or it can be submitted through post. And they are just different ways of passing data. Now, post data is not passed through the URL. It is passed using a different system, and so we can't retrieve the data from the URL. We must retrieve it differently, and that's where we're getting the data. Fortunately, PHP knows how to retrieve the data, and it's already done the hard work for us and stored the data inside of this $_post variable. So again, these variables typically come from forms or AJAX call using the post method. Now, when we use the $_post array or anything using the post method, this is generally to retrieve secure information. So if you're just doing a search on a website, those are typically done using get. All right, we're not really worried about what you're searching for. But if you're filling out a form with some private information, that is most definitely being sent over post. We don't want to send that information over get. So how do we distinguish between a form that submits through post as opposed to through get? Well, we use the method, the method attribute. So this is not even PHP. This is HTML. So here's a form tag of HTML, and a form can have the attribute method, and this tells us how we want to submit the form. We can tell it either get or post. By default, a form will submit using get method. So you do have to explicitly set the method equals to post to make sure the form submits using the post method. All right, then inside of here, we have an input with the text input with the name username, and it has a value in it. So if we were to submit this form like this, then inside of the PHP, we would have inside of the $_post array, we would have an element or a property inside of there with the key username. And it would have the value that matches the value of our input. So that is how we can retrieve form data. And from that point, we can then use that data however we see fit within PHP. The post the $_post method will come into play with your functional phishing assignment. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time with the form handling. I do have a video, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that covers this in more detail. Now, the next one we're going to talk about, the next predefined variable we're talking about is session. So the $_session variable allows us to access and to create and access session data. So before we actually talk about how we do it, let's talk about what a session is. So a session is a way of storing information across multiple pages. So when you use a get method, the data has to be in the URL in order for that data to be accessible to us. With a post method, it only works when a form is submitted or when the post method is sent to it. And it's generally only sent to one page. If we move to another page, that data is lost. So what session allows us to do is it allows us to kind of hold on to data, make it persistent across multiple pages. And it does this by storing the data on the web server. So we're all familiar with cookies because we've all seen those alerts. We're going to track you with cookies. Well, sessions are very, very similar to cookies, except for instead of storing the data on your machine, the data is stored on the web server. But there is a kind of small, tiny cookie which associates with what data, what your browser is, and so we know what data is associated with this person. But the big point is that the data is stored on the web server. This also means that we can store significantly more data in sessions than we could with cookies. Now, in order to use sessions with PHP, the first thing we must do, and this will sneak up on you because you'll forget, I do all the time too, is the session start function must be called before you can use sessions at all. So this is generally something you put at the very top of your PHP file or any PHP script. So you would want to use session_start. This just tells PHP, start tracking sessions for me. From then, we can use the $_server as an associative array. And unlike with get and post, which are read only, we can't manipulate them all. We can just read the data. The $_server array is not read only. We can manipulate it. So we can add new elements to it, and we can read elements that are inside of it. Oh, that's just what I said right there. Okay, so let's see an example of this. So let's say we have two PHP pages. We have a page1.php and we have a page2.php. Page1.php, I call the session_start function. All right, then I create a session with a new key name and I set its value to Michael. And then I'm using this header. Now, header is a function that allows us to redirect one PHP page to another. So we have header here, and we're going to go to page2.php. So then in page2.php, we then once again call session start. So the session start does need to be called on every single page. Now, as your projects get more complicated and you're dealing with more pages, typically this session start is something where we put inside of a page on its own, and then we would include it in all the other pages. We'll be talking about includes in the next slide. So then, because we've added this session start, we can now retrieve data from that session by just calling session and then the key that we created in page 1, which would give us Michael. So these are two different pages, but because we're using session, that data will cross over to those pages. So it creates this persistent data. Sessions is another thing you're going to be using for your functional fishing assignment. All right, so this brings us up to our final topic, which is includes. So PHP does have some statements which allow us to include or import external documents inside of a PHP document. Now I say documents here because it is not limited to other PHP documents. We don't have to just include PHP documents. We can include HTML, we can include CSS, we can include JavaScript as well. So there are many other documents that can be included inside of a PHP file or document. Now, there are 4 different statements that allow us to include these files. They are include, include once, require, and require once. And there are slight differences between all 4, which I'm going to go through here next. All right, so here is the slide to kind of explain what they're going to do. So the include will allow us to include a file. Now, if the file doesn't exist, PHP is going to kind of pop up an error but continue on. All right, it's just going to continue on, assuming it's continue as far as it can if this file is not included. So typically when we use include, we want this to be a file that is not necessary for the page to run. It's something that maybe it's just providing some extra content, or maybe it's providing some styles, something like that. It's not crucial for the PHP to compile. Now, if we get a complex file, a rather complex file, and we want to make sure that we're not including the same file multiple times, in this case, head.html, we don't want to have more than one head tag in our HTML file, we might want to use include once. And what include once will do is it will check to see if a file has been included before, and if it has, it won't include it again. Now, you can use, if you use include once here, and then you use include the time after that, it would still be included multiple times. It only does a check on the include once, just to be clear. All right, so the next two are require and require once. Now, require, if the file cannot be found, it will throw an error right away. It won't try to continue. Unlike with include, it's going to try and continue and work as far as it can without the file. But with require, if it can't find the file, it just throws an error and stops because clearly it thinks something is wrong. This is what we would use if we're dealing with something that is crucial for our project to work. And then we have require once. Again, this will again check to see if the file exists, and if the file has already been included, and if it has, it won't include it again. This require once is something you're going to be using if you're working on larger projects. For most of the stuff we're going to do in this class, require is what we'll probably be using most of the time. All right, so any questions about post, session, or includes?
Oh, I have a question about the section.
Yes.
You told us it is stored in the server, but where it be stored?
It's stored within the server files deep inside. We don't need to worry so much about it. It's not like it's a file. It's more stored in memory. So the other thing to keep in mind that sessions they're only kept as long as the user keeps the session open. The moment they close their browser, the session is lost and then removed.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Any other questions? All right, so I do have a project that covers pretty much everything we talked about, the post, the session, using includes, and that is the blacksmith project. Now, I'm not going to walk through it because it's a bit longer than I want to do online here, but I do have a recording of blacksmith, of walking through at least partial of the project as well, which you can watch. So if I go back to the course website here, we can see right here is the recording for blacksmith. So this is the blacksmith recording. Again, it doesn't go through the entire project, but it goes through a good part of the project. Now, this is from last term's recording, but I have edited it. So I've shortened it down, cut out all the extra stuff. So it's shorter than it would be normally, but it's still quite long. But this will give you a good idea of how to use the different how to use includes, how to use posts, and how to use sessions. The other thing that Blacksmith will help you with is functional fishing, which is your next assignment, because it's going to use the same structure that you will need to use for functional fishing. Now, if you wanted to follow along with the video, there is the starter files for Blacksmith right here under additional resources, as well as the completed version of Blacksmith right here. Okay, so you can download both of those to help you out. All right, and that pretty much wraps up the lecture part of this course for this week. So let me talk about your assignments. So the first assignment you have is Amazing Adventures. And this is a participation assignment, but it is also a GitHub Classroom assignment. So you do want to make sure you accept the assignment on GitHub Classroom. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be creating an associative array which represents a room. So Amazing Adventure is a maze game. So you're creating basically an interactive walking maze, and we're going to be using we're using the get variable, passing different values through the URL to display the different pages. And so there is a maze associated with this, and you're going to be creating an associative array to represent each room in the maze. And then on the index page, you'll display the current room description as well as a set of actions to move through the different rooms. we'll pass through, we'll use the URL variables to create the different action links. So each room will be represented by the query string. And then we'll use the $_get to retrieve each current room's information. We'll submit the URL, submit your repository URL to Brightspace, and this is due June 10th next week. Now, again, there is a solution video for Amazing Adventures. It is on the assignment page. So I do recommend you attempt to do the Amazing Adventures first, and then watch the video to see how it's done. Okay, so that's Amazing Adventure. Now, your exercise for this week is functional fishing. This is a GitHub Classroom assignment. Now, if you remember from functional fishing from Introduction to JavaScript, very, very similar game. In fact, it's pretty much identical, except for we're writing it in PHP. So we're creating an interactive game of functional fishing where you go off and you get some bait and you do some fishing. So you're going to be using session here to store the game status. So inside of Introduction to JavaScript, you remember in JavaScript we had a game object that kept track of all our status. Well, here we're going to be using a session and an array to store the game status. How much bait do we have? How much wood do we have? How much fish do we have? Then we're going to be using a form and the $_post array to get the player's command. So the player will type in wood, and then they will go search for wood, and you'll run the function for that. Or they'll search fish, and then they'll go fishing. So that is the way that works. Then we'll use the provided functions. You'll need to write functions to complete the game. So there are specific functions that are listed in the assignment which you'll need to complete. And this is due on June 17th. All right, so let me bring up the assignment page because that sounded really confusing in my head. I'm sure it's even more confusing to you. So I'm going to open up the functional fishing exercise here. Again, it is a GitHub Classroom assignment, so you want to make sure you accept the assignment. And this goes through and talks about the gameplay, so the different actions. So there's fishing, there's fire, there's bait, wood, eating, inventory, and help. So those are the different actions that can happen. Oh, there's also a restarting of the game. Now, this talks about the game data where you can store it into sessions. And then there is the commands, the different commands that the player can play. So this goes into details on what you need to do, creating the game creating the game data and the different properties that need to be stored in the game data, which will be stored in session. And then it's just talking about setting up your post method and then the different actions for the game. This is what I wanted to get to. So there are different functions you need to create. You need to create a fish function, an eat function, a fire function, a bait function, wood, inventory, and restart function. Okay, so those are all the functions you will need to create for functional fishing. I do provide an example of what this will look like when it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. So here is the gameplay. So you have the welcome message telling you what you need to do. Now, if I wanted to say start the fire, I can type in fire. And I'm going to get a response back that says you do not have enough wood, right? So I don't have any wood to do the fire, so I need to go get the wood. So I'm going to do wood. Okay, and so I have found some wood, and now I can start the fire, and so forth. So you can go ahead and play through that game, but this is what you're going to be building. Now, this is a slightly older version of my game. There's something I do want to point out. In the version that I've given you in the starter files, there's going to be this little link down at the bottom that says clear session. I do talk about this in the blacksmith video. The clear session link down here is a way of you to clear your session. As you're working on this, if you get an error inside of PHP, it can sometimes, with the way this system is set up, will get stored inside of your session. And so you'll get an error in here and it won't go away, even though you've corrected the error. So you have to clear the session. So if ever the messaging inside of here gets a little wonky, you can go ahead and click that clear session. It'll wipe out the game and start over fresh. Right. Okay, so that is the functional phishing. There's, of course, the rubric with that and submission. So any questions about Amazing Adventure or functional phishing? Again, I highly recommend you watch the video on Blacksmith. It will help you a lot with completing the functional phishing assignment because they do use basically the same structure, the same basic functionality, and it will help you understand how to use these different features. All right, so if there's no other questions, let's talk about what we're going to be learning next time. So next time, we're going to move on from PHP. We've covered everything that we need to know about PHP for this course. And next time, we're going to be talking about databases, and we'll talk about SQL and the select statement. So we're going to be moving on to databases and SQL. So it should be fun. We will have a couple participation assignments that we'll talk about, Movie Mayhem, Hybrid 2, and then we'll also have an exercise, Sociology DB 1. Right. Are there any final questions?
Uh, I have a question about the update PHP, because I found I already have the latest version of the PHP. So do I need to?
No, right. So for the update PHP, it's only for students using Laragon. They're the ones who need the update. If you're on a Mac using Valet, you probably already have the latest version of PHP, which is 7.4.6. But on Laragon, when the default PHP version is 7.2.19, which is new enough to use Laravel, but not new enough to install Laravel, which seems a little odd to me. So we just need to update that. And again, this will only come into play for the final project.
So I don't need the Laravel.
Laragon. So don't confuse Laragon and Laravel.
Right.
Laragon is on Windows, they're using Laragon.
Okay.
Any,
so I don't need that, right?
no, you
Because
don't need that.
I already have the yeah. Okay.
Yep. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so that is all I have for today. I will be sticking around for a little bit if there's anybody who does have questions they want to ask me, but that's all I have. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you all next time.